The Art O'Neill Challenge has long been on the Irish mountain dwellers' calendar. Hikers and ultra-runners gather in the depths of winter at night to complete a 60-kilometre grueling course. I say course, but there's no actual official route. Not only are participants facing into the darkness of winter, but they also have to self-navigate over open mountains with almost no actual trails to use. Some might say that those that run the route are lunatics for running in those conditions. The runners are probably looking back at the walkers with awe as they continue into the bleak winter night. So, why are they doing this? Why am I doing this? Well, last year I myself took part in the challenge as a runner. Unfortunately, I dropped out early due to a multitude of reasons, conditions, I ran too fast. But this year I'm going again, with the sole purpose of completing it. The more time I've spent with this challenge in my head, the more fascinated I became with the history of it. Who was Art O'Neill? Why is the course named after him? Normally when a race or a course is named after a person, it usually means that they're not around anymore. Turns out Art hasn't been around for a couple of centuries. I've wanted to do a podcast about the Art O'Neill Challenge for a while, but it wasn't until I came across my guest that I felt that we could do a good job about it. Jane Casey is a fellow hiker and content creator from Wicklow. Over the past few months, she has been documenting her curiosity around Ireland on social media. She offers bite-sized history lessons about things that we all walk by unknowingly every single day. And in a country like Ireland, that is steeped in history and folklore, she has plenty of subject matter to get through. When I introduced Jane to the topic of Art O'Neill and the challenge, she was excited to be involved. While Jane is not a historian, she does her research very well and she came to the show very well prepared. So, if you're taking part in this year's challenge or you're just a curious Casey like Jane, this is an episode you won't want to miss. This is the Hiker Podcast. I am Owen Hamilton, and this is a conversation about the Art O'Neill Challenge with Jane Casey. Thanks for joining me, Jane.
Thanks for having me, Owen. Really lovely to be on. Big fan of the app.
Good stuff. Yeah, and you're enjoying all those historical maps?
Yeah, I've had a deep dive through them. I mean, I'm a nerd about maps as well. Like I'm actually embarrassed to tell you how many atlases I had. I actually remember I got an atlas for Christmas when I was a child. Love maps. Absolutely love maps. No, it's brilliant. Well done.
No, thanks very much. Well, it's not all me. The guys are still working hard right now as we speak, building the app. Okay. So, as I said, like the Art O'Neill Challenge, it's a memorial run. It's a charity run, but it marks the escape or the events of the escape back in 1592 of Art O'Neill, his cousin, I believe, Henry O'Neill, and Red Hugh O'Donnell. I might have completely butchered the names there.
Dead right.
No, dead right. Okay, perfect. Yeah. I've done my research.
On the nose.
And they escaped Dublin Castle from their English prisoner captors, and they fled through the city and ran into the Wicklow Mountains in the middle of winter and in the middle of night. Why did they do that? How did they get to that point? And I suppose what is the significance of this event?
It's pretty brutal, isn't it?
It's rough.
It really kind of shows what Ireland was like back then. Like it really was wild, absolutely wild. And also to say you're in good company because Art O'Neill himself also failed the challenge because he died.
I think he made it slightly further than I did, but yeah.
Tiny little bit further. Yeah, so look, I'm going to caveat all this with I didn't know much about Art O'Neill before you got in touch with me, but then when you brought it to my attention, I took a deep dive into it. Ireland at the time, I actually didn't know an awful lot about the kind of political divides in Ireland at the time around the 1500s, because obviously we were under British rule, so it was the 1200s that in 800 years, as we know, that's when the Normans came over and took over Ireland, and it was a couple hundred years after that. And what I actually didn't really know was that even though we were under British rule, there was still, I guess, Irish nobility and particularly family dynasties that had control of specific areas, which is, for me, like, there's a lot of moving parts into the story. It's awfully political. I'm going to try and keep it as simple as possible. But yeah, there was an awful lot of Irish that still had control of their own lands, and it was very Game of Thrones-esque. There was a lot of fighting. There was a lot of backstabbing, literally, between families to gain control of these areas. And one of these dynasties were called the O'Neills of Tyrone. Now, it's not County Tyrone as we know it now. It was much bigger than that. Tír Owen, I think, is it in Irish, which, I mean, I did pass Irish, but Land of Owen, something like that.
It's my land.
Yeah, exactly. So Owen doesn't feature in this, whoever he is. But yeah, so look, the O'Neills were one of Ireland's most well-known dynasties. And as I said, there was plenty of land that was still under Irish rule, even though the English were actually governing the entire country. So Art O'Neill himself, he was a Gaelic leader, and he was the son of Shane O'Neill and Catherine MacLean. MacLean was Scottish. She was from a Scottish family. So it was his dad's third wife, actually. And he was married to another Catherine and another woman as well. But basically, Catherine was Shane's third wife, and they had Art O'Neill. His dad died in 1567 when Art was a young guy, and the dynasty was taken over by a lad called Turlough Linnoch O'Neill. Again, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And he wasn't a big fan of young Art because Art was a bit boisterous and he had lots of ideas about how the place should have been run. So what Turlough did is he banished Art away and gave Art's land to his own supporters. So Art, not knowing what to do, he went and lived with his mother's family, the MacLeans of Duart Castle in Scotland. So Duart Castle is still there. It's on the west coast of Scotland, the Isle of Mull, I think it's called, and it was the seat of the MacLean clan for 700 years or something.
Wow.
It's really stunning. From what I've looked up online, it's a pretty popular tourist destination. But it's exactly what you think it would be. It's like a lot of the castles we have in Ireland, except it's on this beautiful island that is right on the edge of the country. So he went there for a couple of years. Then he said, look, feck this. I want to take my land back. So him and his brothers, when they became old enough, they started their own thing called the McShanes. So Mac, as we know, is son of Shane. So the McShanes. And they were a big threat to Turlough Linnoch in Tyrone. So they wanted to take over the land that they saw as rightfully theirs. So they got help from the Scottish MacLeans. And in 1584, sorry, I'm just looking at my notes, 1584, the McShanes, along with 3,000 Scottish soldiers, came to take over the land to kill Turlough, and so Art and his brothers could, I guess, take their seat at the throne, I suppose.
It does sound very Game of Thrones-esque.
Yeah, and look, and there's a lot more to this as well, and I guess I really am trying to simplify it, and I'm sure there'll be people listening.
Yeah, there's probably like days and weeks and months. It's like kind of like almost Lord of the Rings-esque, where you're like 250 years passed, but we're going to just simplify that down to a monologue.
Exactly, that's exactly it. Like, there's an awful lot in it. So this is as simple as I could get it. More for my understanding, to be honest.
Yeah.
I was getting lost in articles with, do you know how many O'Neills there are? There's about 50 different O'Neills. Yeah. Like, which one is that? And this, but it's super interesting. So 3,000 Scottish soldiers came over from Duart Castle in Scotland, and they were ready to fight in the name of the McShanes, so they could rule Tyrone all over again. But Turlough was like, no, we need some help here. What am I going to do? So he appealed to the British government to help them, and they helped him and sent in reinforcements, and the Scots retreated. They said, no, actually, this isn't our fight. So they left. So unfortunately, the McShanes didn't get what they wanted in that scenario. But during the first half of 1585, the McShanes decided just to cause havoc in the lordship. They were like, well, look, if we can't rule the place, we're going to completely cause chaos, absolute chaos. And because of this, Turlock lost control of the territory. So they came in and made it actually quite politically unstable. And he lost control. Basically, he just didn't have, people didn't see him as having the authority anymore, Turlock,
Right.
because
Yeah.
he let these McShanes run riot. So he stepped down, but he had a chat with another guy called Hugh O'Neill, another O'Neill, and he became the successor. So Hugh O'Neill then became the lord of the lordship in the summer of 1585. However, so this is where it gets kind of complicated because while Ireland was still in control of, while Ireland was still England was still in control of Ireland, is what I'm saying. There was still Queen Elizabeth and the Crown was still number one.
Mm-hmm.
So what Hugh O'Neill did, he was the new king, or lord, should I say. He brought in a guy called Sir John Perrot, and he was Lord Deputy to Queen Elizabeth I. And basically, he got him to endorse his rule. So John Perrot said, "Okay, you're the rightful lord of this territory." Ultimately, they wanted the English wanted the crown, I suppose, to own the land, but they thought this was an easier route.
Mm-hmm.
Down the line, if we play ball with Hugh O'Neill, we might be able to seize power off him. And better the devil, I suppose. So the Crown endorsed Hugh O'Neill's power. And Art O'Neill, he was considered a threat to the stability because he had already caused chaos. And that's why he was arrested.
Right.
Because he was an absolute chancer, basically.
Head the ball, as we call them.
Exactly. He seems like Chief Head the Ball. Like, he really ran riot. So they arrested him so he wouldn't try and overtake the lordship again. And he was imprisoned in Dublin Castle. So just also to give you context on Dublin Castle. So that was built in, I think, the 13th century.
Mm-hmm.
It was the site of a Viking settlement, I believe. So there's a long time been a settlement there. And it was the headquarters of the English. And then later the British, right up until the Free State, really, 1922. So that's where all the prisoners went, basically. So he was brought there. But knowing what we know about Art O'Neill, he didn't take that sitting down. So in December 1585, he broke out of prison for the first time. And similarly, he hid in the Wicklow Mountains, but he was recaptured quite soon after. Well, about a year after, no, that's a lie. I'm looking at my notes, about 2 months after. Poor old He was captured again in February 1586.
Okay.
So he lasted 2 months. And it's mad. I think back then, we don't have GPS. We don't have phone, or back then they didn't have phones or anything. So how did they find him in the Wicklow Mountains?
Yeah.
I've no idea.
And back then as well, like, you have to remember that anyone who's listened to this that knows Wicklow Mountains now, like Wicklow Mountains now is still somewhat wild. Like, there's parts of Wicklow, especially where this route goes. Like, I don't know if you yourself have ever been up around Mullacleavon and like that plateau, like just like where the three, where Glenmalure, Glendalough, and Glendasan all kind of descend down from this plateau. It's barren and there's nothing up there, and it's like you could be up there for weeks and no one would ever find you. And like, but that's now, like, imagine what it was like back then when there was nothing. There's no trails, no roads, nothing.
It's mad. I like Wicklow is one of my favorite places in the world. I'm from Wicklow. I'm from Bray. I mean, some people would say that I'm a fake Wicklow person because I'm from Bray. I'm from the border. But I've spent an awful lot of time in the Wicklow Mountains for that reason alone, just because it's it's wild, and it's on our doorstep. I've actually gotten lost many a time in the Wicklow Mountains, but thank God for apps like Hiker. I found my way out. But yeah, I couldn't even imagine. I mean, I think back then it would probably have been a case that he probably sought help from someone,
Hmm.
and they probably ratted him out
Yeah.
for under threat or for money or whatever it was. But he couldn't have survived 2 months up there on his own.
Yeah, like I have to imagine, like there's probably also not that many people that were living up in the Wicklow Mountains back then. There, like the towns like Lara, Glendalough, Glenmalure, there's probably only a handful of houses that were in there. And eventually, the taxman's going to come around knocking on the door, and taxmen were also the soldiers, So they were
Exactly.
like,
Yeah,
"Where is Art O'Neill? He's got to be here somewhere." So I can't imagine it was that long until someone spoke up.
exactly. And also remember that, like, we were very much under English rule, and it was scary to be
Yeah.
Irish in Ireland at the time. So, you could have been killed. So you probably would have given them up. I don't know. Would I have? Oh, sorry, my laptop fell there. Would I have? Probably. you know,
Probably, yeah.
just what you said about, there probably wasn't a lot of people living up there. Now, I don't know this for sure, but I think actually back then there was more than you think. Um,
Oh,
there's now, look, it's later on, but there's a lot of famine settlements
that's
up
true.
there in the middle of nowhere. And then around like Blessington and stuff, there was a lot of little settlements there too. Now, I'm
The
not sure.
Blessington Lake as well
Yeah,
is like a
yeah,
flooded village.
I know. Yeah, the what's it, the urban legend of the steeple that you can see when the water's low.
Never
It's
seen that.
fake. Yeah, it's fake. It's fake. I've had to look at it.
And I don't want to go down a rabbit hole of other historical sites, but and maybe that's a chance for another podcast. But have you ever been to is it the Scotch Village?
Do you know what?
Um,
I haven't, and it's on my list because it looks absolutely beautiful. But no, I haven't. I only really found out about it maybe a couple of months ago, and for whatever reason, weather being bad or whatever, I haven't got a chance to go out to it yet. But hopefully in the new year. Have you?
yeah, yeah, I've been a few times. It's gorgeous. And it's just clearly you can see it's like an ancient small little village. But I think it was built around the kind of the same era, like around the 1400s, 1500s, and it was housed by mercenaries that were employed by the Latouche family, I think, to protect their land essentially. But they were all, I think they were Scottish. I believe they were, hence Scots Village. They were brought in, but I don't know the full history of it. But yeah, it's cool. Like Wicklow was probably densely populated but probably a lot by like soldiers and a lot more people that were kind of aligned to the English, to the crown.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Like, you say the Latouche family there. So I've
Yeah,
done a few videos on them. They used to own, I'm conscious we're going down a rabbit hole here, but they used to own the Glen of the Downs. They had an estate called
wow,
Bellevue Estate. So that was their country retreat, would you believe? They owned feckin' half of Wicklow.
yeah,
They were a French Huguenot family. I think they came over originally around the 1600s, but they became very prominent. They also own Marley Park and half the Dublin Mountains.
yeah.
And yeah, but look, a lot of these families, that's it. They would have been very rich. They would have been nobility. They would have been given a lot of land by the English
Mm.
government. And then obviously when there was revolutions, they all got their houses burnt out and land stripped from them by locals, rightly. Um,
Just a quick interruption to let anyone know who's taking part in the challenge this year that you can get all the mapping that you require for the route on Hiker Pro Plus. That's all the east-west mapping, all the OSI and Harvey mapping, all available on Pro Plus. And if you sign up before the 31st of December, you'll get 20% off your first year. Just head to hiker.app or upgrade via the app today. Okay, back to the conversation.
But anyway, I'm going down a rabbit hole here. But yeah, look, Wicklow would have been barren.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, there probably, as you say, there probably would have been a lot of settlements there. But actually, when we look at the wilderness, like it's pretty bleak up there, and especially in the middle of winter.
Yeah.
So why he chose twice to break out in the middle of winter, I don't know. But look,
Also, a northern man as well, like trying to navigate through the hills of Wicklow. I don't know if this is something that you had found through your research as well. You mentioned the cold, and the cold in Wicklow in January, it's different. I actually had a friend that came over from the States there recently, and he tried to another lunatic. He tried to run the entire Wicklow Way, and starting at night. And anyway, that's another story. Um, but he was like, oh, cold, that's not that bad. Like, 1, 2, 3 degrees, that's not bad. That's warm in certain parts of Colorado and in these states. And I was like, no. Wicklow is different. Like it gets into your bones. It's that cold. But back in the 16 or the night when this happened, or in the 1500s, I think it was the 15 and 1600s, was the mini what was it, the like a mini or little ice age. So the experience in that time, it was like far colder. Like there was recordings of the Thames River like freezing over. It was that cold.
I didn't know that. Please tell me more. I didn't come
That's
up.
all I know.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so
So it's kind of like a weird weather event those couple
it
of
was
years.
a weird like weather event that happened over the course of maybe a couple of decades, where the winters were just much colder than they are like now. So your average temperature in Wicklow around that time probably was like in the low, -10, -15, rather than what it's now, where it's like -10, -5. Like I know once it's beyond freezing, you might not tell the difference, but as I just said there, Wicklow cold is different. And if you're like -15 versus -5, and you're trying to run away from, an army
with nothing as
with
well.
nothing.
Probably didn't even have a jacket, or that's what's crazy. And you're dead right. Like Wicklow, I have been on those mountains in winter when the freezing fog descends.
Oh God.
It's really frightening. Like it really is, because just like that, like I mean, look, I've like up Spink or whatever, you know what I mean? But like when the fog comes down, you can't see a thing. And it's actually very frightening. So and that's with way markers, that's with apps. I couldn't imagine what that would feel like without even a jacket on, and you can't even see your hand in front of you. So it was quite the feat. I mean, but I guess he saw it as, it's this or die in prison. So
yeah,
why
exactly.
not?
Yeah.
So yeah, look, he was recaptured and he was thrown back in prison 7 years later. So he was there another 7 years in the prison. He escaped again. Now this is the escape that I guess the challenge commemorates.
Mm-hmm.
So he escaped again, as you say, with his cousin Henry and Red Hugh O'Donnell. So what they did was they with the help of O'Donnell, he cut off his chains. So they would have been chained up. If like really imagine like Tower of London stuff. Like they would have been chained to walls in cells. So they managed to get their chains off, and then they used a rope to climb down into the sewer and the castle moat. But on the way down, Art injured himself. So I think, let me look at my notes here. I think it was, he was struck by a stone. I'm not sure what was injured, but it made it very difficult to be mobile. It affected his mobility. And that's not great when you have to make your way through a city.
Started.
As when you have to make your way through a guarded city, where people are looking for you, and then have to go all the way up to Glenmalure. So they all escaped on foot, with the aid of a guide. So I couldn't find the guide's name or who he was, but they did have help. Now I would love to know how they orchestrated that help. How did they get word to the outside, or was it a case of they left and then they found someone to help them? I'm not sure.
So I do think that there was I just quickly glanced at a Wikipedia page on this, and I believe that it was Red Hugh O'Donnell, because Red Hugh O'Donnell's O'Donnell family was one of the other dynasties.
Yeah.
the O'Donnell family, and they were based up in Tyrconnell, which is now Donegal, or part of it. And I believe that he, what's the word where you bribe? He bribed some of the soldiers to help get them out. And then Queen Elizabeth found out about this, and I think the soldiers that were bribed, I believe that they were executed.
Sounds about right.
Yeah.
I know English history. Okay, brilliant. Okay, thanks for filling in that blank. Yeah, I think the only way would have been bribery, I suppose, you know. But what did they have to bribe them with? Anyway, see, this is what I say about Curious Mind. I'm like, oh, now I've got to go figure that out. It's a curse sometimes.
We'll share notes. We'll share YouTube video links.
Yeah. Well, you know, I actually didn't look at the Wikipedia page, which probably would have been the best thing to do. I found loads of old, I guess, what's the word I look for? Like academic papers.
Oh, wow.
On it. And then I went down a rabbit hole of Hugh O'Neill just before this, and I was like, wait, I'm now reading into his whole life story. I was completely getting pulled away.
Yeah.
But anyway,
but that is the thing, because I guess when I originally wanted to do this episode, it was a lot of people do the Art O'Neill challenge. It's almost like a rite of passage for a lot. I actually met a guy who was hiking it the other day, and I asked, was it the first time he was doing it? And he said, well, my dad did it, my sister did it, my mom did it, and now it's my turn. So it's almost like this, like, passing of the flame type thing. So like people have been doing this for a good number of years. It was originally started by a rugby club, I think. I can't remember which one, but then Dublin Wicklow Mountain Rescue took it over. And it's just amazing event that goes on every year. And I know a lot of people know kind of who Art O'Neill is and kind of who Red Hugh O'Donnell are, but no, like, it's just good to know like a little bit more about who these people were, but also as we're doing now, the events that led up to it. And there's things as well that, like, I don't know if they sparked kind of flashbacks for you, but the term "flight of the Earls" came up, and I was like, I remember that.
Yeah, for sure.
That was like drilled into my head in secondary school.
Yeah, that's gas. That's so funny. You know, that's why I love. I guess. Look, I wouldn't even. I hike. I wouldn't call myself a mad hiker. I like history. I wouldn't call myself a historian. Yeah. But what I love about like challenges like this or historical routes, so like before we started recording, I was saying I've done big chunks of the Camino and even the Wicklow Way. I love when it's a route that has so much history in it. I love thinking of who walked this before me and what were they thinking and why were they doing it, and you know. So I guess for anyone who's doing the challenge, you know, I think it's really important to connect with art. And, you know, to think that this guy, you know, all he wanted was just to get his land back. And he was banished by his family and then ended up in prison, and he was just trying to save his life. And that's the exact same route that you're doing, but 500 years later, which I think is so cool. And that's why I love history so much, because, like, I really do think we're all, you know, interconnected in some way. Like, we're a drop in the ocean, really, of time.
Yeah.
And 500 years ago isn't that long ago, but
no,
not at all, especially when you're up the Wicklow Mountains and you see like 5,000-year-old tombs and stuff like that. 500 years is nothing. So yeah, so that's why I love to kind of hike those routes and commend anyone who's doing the Art O'Neill challenge. And I guess when you're in the absolute thick of it and you're freezing your arse off, to remind yourself, it's fine, I'll be grand.
I've got my Gore-Tex.
Exactly.
Art didn't even have shoes at one point.
Yeah. And I hear there's people that give out coffee along the way. Am I wrong?
Oh yeah, there's there will be a couple of aid stations, but one in particular is the Red Hugh's kitchen, which I think is gas, because I don't think like there would be everything that's in the kitchen is all like hot food and bread and you know, blankets and able to change your clothes. None of that existed back then.
Absolutely.
But yeah, there's like hot soup. There's like a bunch of different things that are kind of handed out to kind of help people that are maybe a little struggling, you know, a little bit. But again, like in your research of the I suppose not just the route and the escape, what was it's probably hard to pick out, but like what would have been the most shocking thing that you came across?
One of the most shocking. Well, I think the whole thing is pretty shocking. Like,
Yeah,
it's really interesting to, I guess, visualize Ireland back then,
yeah,
and to kind of see it as it once was. Like, it was a very brutal place, and no one thought twice about beheading you. And I think the fact that there was all this drama and brutality. Just well, actually, I would say, God, we come so far, but actually, this kind of brutality around land ownership, it still happens, not in Ireland, thank God. But yeah, I think the whole thing is pretty shocking, and the fact that, the fact that land was the most important thing to everybody, at the cost of human life. And so I think the whole thing is pretty brutal, to be honest.
it is, and it's interesting you say that because we're talking about land being like a kind of a God given right. It's and especially I suppose since Ireland became a free state, and I don't want to go down another rabbit hole here, but that there is this sense that of ownership that like your land is your land, and no one else is allowed to go near it. No one allowed to go to trespass or anything like that. And if you look over in the UK, and especially up in like Scotland and in Norway, there's just different ideas around land these days. There's a more kind of like holistic and like communal view of land. Yes, you own the land; it's your right to do with it what you want, but the ability to share that land and to share that space for the good of society and for the good of nature, and for the environment, is kind of precedent. It's more important. But anyway, again, I'm going down another rabbit hole that we definitely don't want to go in this one.
So you're dead right. Look, just back then, I guess the most shocking thing about it is just how primal Ireland was.
Yeah.
In, as I say, 500 years ago seems like forever ago, but it really wasn't. Like, when we think about that, it was probably about 10 generations ago,
Yeah.
12 generations ago. So yeah, the whole thing is pretty brutal, and that's what shocks me. But yeah, look, I mean, to kind of wrap up, I suppose. Excuse the pun, because Art O'Neill definitely didn't wrap up when he went up to Glenmalure, but he was injured when he left the castle.
Yeah.
And he was in a pretty bad state. But they got pretty far, and they found a cave. Where they, and I don't know, is this on the route? Is the cave on the route?
It is, yeah. So it's more of, it's a kind of enclosed kind of shelters. I wouldn't go as far as to say it was a cave, but right. And there's a nice big plaque there for you to go and have a look at.
Yeah, I've seen pictures.
Yeah. So that's there, and that's the spot where they believe that he perished.
Yeah. So I mean, it was, as you say, imagine the snow, the rain, the hail. They went into this cave. And and that's where he died. They did have help though from Fiach McHugh O'Byrne. So he was, again, all these families owned all this different land, and he was chief based in Wicklow. So he was a local, and he helped them. But by the time he reached them, Art was in bits, and he was extremely ill. And unfortunately, we know his fate. He perished. But there is a cross there for him, and that's also on the route, I believe.
Yeah. You have to get there. If you don't get to complete it. So a lot of people previously I think now there is a big spotlight, and you can't miss it. It's right there, and it's there's mountain rescue people all around it, and you can't miss it. But I think in previous years, you had to be within like a certain distance of it. They had like a tracker around it.
Right.
But you're left to your own volition to actually go near it, and it's quite like it's difficult terrain, let alone pitch black.
Yeah.
If you're hiking it, obviously by then it's daytime and you're going to have a bit of daylight. But if you're running it, it's nighttime and it's very, very dark.
I can't imagine. So the trails, like, are they quite hard to negotiate? They're not. Are they rocky? Are you climbing? What's the story?
So So okay, I suppose talk about the route. So the
Yeah.
route
You can
brings it.
educate me here, by the way,
Yeah,
because
yeah. So
I it's something. Look, now that I talk to you about it, maybe sometime in the future, maybe it'll be something.
you should definitely do it. Yeah, I mean, like I would love to go back and actually hike it,
Yeah,
and hike it with a group of people and kind of make an evening of it,
yeah.
and finishing in the Glenmore
I literally was about
Lodge.
to say that get a pint of Guinness in the Glenmore.
Absolutely,
I've been there in the Wicklow Way before, all right, and it's a great stop off.
it really is. Yeah, it really, really is. So the route itself. So yeah, start in Dublin Castle, but now you'll have to break your leg because that's how Art O'Neill did it.
Yeah,
So you
absolutely.
start in Dublin Castle, you head out towards Harold's Cross. I might try and like visually put up a map of the route while when I edit this. You run through Harold's Cross out towards kind of Furhouse area, out towards the Bornabreen Reservoir, and you pass that, and you're running out the roads there essentially, and you come to a crossroads, which then brings you all the way down the side of Capure, the mountain, and then you eventually end up at Capure Estate, and that's the kind of, it's not the first checkpoint. It's like the mount. You're now entering the mountain section. So you go in there, you get your hot cup of soup, you get your trail runners on if you're running, or if you need to make any kind of changes to your outfit or anything. That's where you do that. From there, then you start heading over towards I think it's O'Donnell's Forest. It's one of the many different forests that are all around that area.
Is it after Red Hugh? Red Hugh O'Donnell.
Red Hugh O'Donnell's kitchen.
So it's named after him.
Oh, sorry, O'Donnell's potentially no, because O'Donnell is a Tyrconnell is like Donegal, like
Yeah.
northern. But as you said, like there was so many O'Neills, there's so many O'Donnells, like you never know.
Leave it with me.
Um,
We'll figure it out.
yeah, I trust you. Yeah, exactly.
Figure it out.
So then you head down there. So that's the first kind of like trail that you get to. Everything up until there is like road, obviously in the city, and then kind of country road, Boreens and stuff like that. Now you're onto a trail, and that's just like a kind of a forest fire road, like a stuff that the Quilter will use to get their bulldozers down. So then you go through there, and then there's just like a little gap, and you're up into the mountain. And from there, it's pretty much just open mountain. There is no trails. There
Wow.
are tracks. There might be deer tracks that exist there, but other than that, it's just like open mountain. So this is where I suppose the other side of the challenge comes in is navigation. And yes, there's apps like Hiker that can get you around, but you're talking about freezing cold in the middle of January, in the middle of winter. Like you don't want to 100% rely on technology, and this is the worst sell for a hiker in the world. But you have, and it is the rules. You have to have a paper map and a compass with you, and you need to know how to use that as well. So you need to figure out like your handrails. How are you going to navigate across this piece of land? So from there, you're going across to towards Mullacleavon, which is one of the highest mountains in Wicklow. It just looks like a big bulge, as most mountains do. You're going to cross that to a place called Billy Burns Gap, which is a gap between Mullacleavon and another mountain, which the name escapes me, but it's just a col, a big kind of saddle between two mountains. And it is very windy up there. It's one of the windiest places in Wicklow.
I can imagine.
I was only up there on Saturday, and I nearly got blown over a couple of times. It's really, really windy. You then descend down towards Balnagie Bridge, which is in the Wicklow Gap. So I don't know if you've ever been in the Wicklow Gap before. It's like that road that goes all the way from kind of Hollywood, Blessington area, Valleymount,
Yeah.
past Mullacleavon, up past Tonnagie, and then eventually down into Glendalough. Down to, it's like St. Kevin's Way is
I know.
goes down that way. So when you get to there, then you go back onto a trail again, and again it's like another kind of fire track that brings you all the way up to a gate. And once you get to that gate, then it's pure open mountain. and you're kind of walking. I think, and sorry, this is I'm almost certain that this is the point at which Art O'Neill kind of suffered his final blow. So you have to make a river crossing at this point, and it's a very deep river, and especially if there's rain at all, or like heavy snow or heavy rain, the level of this river can get pretty high, and the speed of the water is pretty fast. So if you slip into that water, even with all the Gore-Tex in the world,
Yeah.
it's like if you get water, especially on your torso, it's going to be pretty hard to kind of get through the rest of it unless you have like a change or you're able to like dry off really, really quickly.
At what point? So it's 60 kilometers long, if I'm not wrong. Is that
Roughly
it?
around between 55 and 60, kind of because there's no actual route.
Yeah.
They kind of estimate it. Yeah.
So at what point is that river crossing? Like, if you were to get wet, how long is then left after you?
So I'm going to guess, but I'll bring up the map on this one. You're probably talking around 45 kilometers, 40 to 45 kilometers in at this point. So he got pretty far.
But 10 or 15 kilometers, well, you have 45 behind you, and
you had like tons, like a lot more elevation. You have a couple of mountains that you need to climb after this.
Yeah.
And then, once you get up to this, when you pass that river, if you do pass that river, you then have to climb up a mountain to where Arts Cross is.
Mm-hmm.
And to be a bunch of people from Mountain Rescue that are there. There's actually a bit of crack there. I don't know how anybody could have any crack at that time. But then you go from there and you have to find your line that will bring you over to Glenmalure. And I know a lot of people who have got to that point and have been misled by the topography, like literally like the shape of the land has misguided them.
Oh, wow.
And they've ended up in Glendalough. They literally just went into the wrong valley.
Oh, that breaks my heart for them.
Yeah, the wrong valley, and then people just go. You can see like when, because we would have people tracking it, and you can just see their tracks, and they're going around in circles, and they're up and down, and like it can get really disorientating up there because peat hags. The topography and peat hags. So peat hags are just like, it's basically bog that has subsided, and you've just got these towers that are like 6-7 feet tall, and you will walk around one and try to correct yourself, but then all of a sudden you hit another one, and it's like a labyrinth. Okay. And all of a sudden you're doing like it's like a mouse trying to get out of a maze, and yeah, it just disorientates. And that's why they kind of estimated, because people end up doing like, some people end up doing like 65, 70 kilometers because they just keep going around in circles. Yeah.
I'd say it's nice though. You know, I think in this day and age, we're kind of spoilt for, with all the devices we have. And yeah. I think what I kind of love about hiking, and I'm not very good at it, but I love the idea of being able to find your way.
Yes, yeah.
And to follow your nose instead of just looking at a map. Now, I do look at apps too, but it must be really gratifying to kind of learn more about that, about actual navigation and orienteering.
Well, that's it. Like, I think, again, I'm not going to sell hiker really, really well here, because I do think that you know, people should be learning these skills. I think there was a bit of a paradigm shift over the last number of probably about 10 years ago, when people just stopped going outdoors and stopped hiking, and like the numbers of people that were doing that were diminishing, and it was always seen as like an older person's game. You know, you retire, you start hiking. Whereas now, in the last few years, especially because of COVID, the numbers of people that are hiking are just through the roof, which is amazing. But there's a huge reliance on technology, because we've grown up in that world with technology in our hands at all times. And we're like, oh, well, I can just use technology to help me do that. Yeah. But you've seen in like, I don't know if you pay attention to this, but like, there are apps that will lead people the wrong way because they've got unverified content, or people are using Google Maps to hike a trail. Don't do that. That's just wrong.
I will say I've used another well known app, which I haven't used again because it sent me straight into a logging area. It was so
Ah,
out of date. This was up in Lockdown. I was going a different route around Lockdown, and what's good though is what I use the apps for is that it's really good to I guess just get inspiration for new places to
inspiration.
go. I get bogged down in the same places, but yeah, I ended up straight in kind of a logging area, and I was like jumping over logs, and there was sheep coming at me. It was terrible. So yeah, I mean, do you know what I did there? I had my head in my phone, following
Yeah,
it. I saw myself going into a logging area, and I said, "I know this still must be right. Let's see how
yeah,
far I get." Like,
yeah.
so I
Rely
think
on
basically,
rely on the screen rather than the nature that's in front of you. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, exactly. That's it. I've learned my lesson, but I
Yeah,
think
well, I
what
think I suppose what we're trying to do, and why we kind of involve ourselves in things like Art O'Neill, and we work with a lot of mountain guides and mountain skills providers around the world, is we want people to find that kind of empowerment, or be empowered to be a navigator themselves, and like to understand basic map skills, like
yeah.
what does a map look like, what are contour lines, what's a peak, what's a saddle, what's a call, all these things. So you don't have to get too technical, but when you're in the wild, when you're like Art O'Neill, and you have the luxury of a map and a compass in front of you, that you know how to use it.
And we have
um,
it in us as well. Like I would argue that we've just gotten a little bit lazy, but
yes.
we are we're kind of animals at the end of the day. Like we're primed for survival. I have a gas story. A mate of mine was doing the Wicklow Way with some friends, and her dad is from like Barnacullia, so up near the blue light there. He's a mountain man, Dublin mountain man, and her and her mates got lost, and one of the girls hurt her ankle, and the fog started to descend, and they didn't really know where they were, and they couldn't see past their hand. So my mate called her dad and said, "I don't know what to do. This is where I am." And he said, "Okay, what do you see?" And she's like, "Oh, there's a couple of trees, and the sun is this side, and whatever." And he was like, "All right, give me half an hour." And about half an hour, 45 minutes later, they saw him come through the fog in the middle of the Wicklow Way. And I love that. He just grew up with it. It was nothing to him.
Yeah.
That's what he did. He navigated the mountains. And I think, yes, challenges like this, I think, can really take people back to that and get those skills, because we're all capable of it.
Yeah, that's it. Everybody is capable of this, and like I've done mental skills training myself, and I've seen people that have come to those training courses, and they're just like, I hadn't got a clue what a contour line was, and now I can confidently pick up a map and tell you exactly where I am and how long it's going to take me to get over there,
Mm-hmm.
and all these different things. So it definitely is something that's within us all. We just need to give it a go and just try it. And hiker is obviously, in a lot of ways it is a luxury to have an app like Hiker, but we try to instill that in our product, where we give people proper maps, so you're not just using like a Google Map style kind of really basic map. You actually have like contour lines, you have like the local knowledge in that map. So when you
And
are looking
genuinely,
around and looking for like point of interest, you're like, oh, okay, that boulder actually has a name. It's not just a boulder. you
yeah.
know?
No, really, like what I've noticed about Hiker is that it is far more thorough in terms of like it's a hiker's app.
Yeah,
It's not a leisurely stroll on a Sunday app, and that's what I'm really
we're
impressed
a bit of that too. We don't want to distance ourselves too much to that. But yeah, you are right though. We are, like, if you're looking for tools, if you're looking for something to help you get outdoor and to get confidence in the outdoors properly, yeah, that's what Hiker is for. Yeah, we're not like go for a walk in the park type of app, but like, if you want to get all the tools to practice and go down to your local park and do that, by all means. But like, we definitely will be more kind of catered for the serious hikers, or the people that want to be the serious hikers.
Absolutely, yeah,
Um,
very accessible.
yeah. So then, I suppose that the end of the route then is getting onto table track, which I thought was a really like long winded way of getting to the end. I thought you just beeline down through the valley, And if anybody's listening to this and they're just like, they're probably laughing, like listening to me say that, because it is the worst place to go. It's like you're probably signing your own death wish by going down there, because it's just like steep terrain going through a forest. There is no tracks for like miles. So you're better off going over to Table Track and you just zigzag all the way down. And like, have you ever been up to Table Track before?
No.
Table Track. This is probably another thing for you to go down a rabbit hole on. As I was pretty sure this was one of the original roads that existed that went over the Wicklow Mountains.
Oh wow, okay.
And it will get you a good bit up It will get you a good bit up Lugnaquilla.
Okay, cool.
And it's over on the Glen of Amal side of Lugnaquilla. So you can go over, get onto Table Track, and basically run all the way down into Glenmalure. Now the finish line is no longer at the car park there in Barravore. You have to run the road from there to Glenmalure Lodge.
Oh wow!
So for the runners,
a good place to finish it, though.
It is a good place to finish it, but that I don't know if you've ever walked on that road before.
Yeah, I have. Yeah,
it's grim.
Yeah, it is grim.
So I'm not really selling Art O'Neill Challenge all that well, but
no, it sounds incredible, and really, I commend you and anyone who's doing it. I think it's 200 people doing it. Is that right?
I think it's limited to 200 or 250. Yeah. Because it's on open mountain, they have to limit the numbers of people that do it every year.
Yeah. Like I can only say good luck. I have no doubt that you're going to get through it this year. Sounds like you've been training.
I have been training for it. I failed it last year. The failure stirred up something inside me that I didn't know existed. So I've had a year of a lot of training. I'm not trying to win it by any means, but I definitely want to finish it. That's the goal. And I
didn't know. I didn't know that it was a competition. I didn't know that you could win it. I thought it was just do the challenge.
Yeah, the run would be there would be winners of the run. I don't know if there's necessarily winners of the hike. You know, now I could be completely wrong in saying that, and people are like, there is, and I've won it 5 times. But I suppose, like, obviously, hiking is far less competitive than running is.
Yeah, for sure, absolutely, and that's why I never run. Well, the most running I've done, I did the 10K, the women's mini marathon, and I hated every second of it. I absolutely hate it. Turns out I have flat feet, so it was extremely painful. I was like, why is running so hard? So hiking is my thing. Slow and steady wins the race.
Look, the saying is stop and smell the roses, not run through the field and smell as many roses as you can.
Dead right. That's it. Yeah. That's it. Yeah. And when you're doing it, think about poor Art O'Neill, who lost his life up there.
Absolutely, yeah. Especially after having this conversation and all the videos that I've watched in leading up to this as well. Like, I'll be like, he ran through here, and you know.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Ireland's great. Like, you know, Ireland's, and like, this isn't the only historic route. There's hundreds of historic routes all over Ireland. So, I mean, this is probably one of the harder ones, but won't be bothered to own. It'll be grand.
Yeah, well, look, hopefully you'll get to do it one of these days as well. Get to do the hike. But it is, anyone listening to this as well that hasn't done it before. I haven't done it before myself, but I know a lot of people that have. I've tried it before. Just even the buzz down in Dublin City, in the Dublin Castle. Jane, actually, even if you're around yourself on the evening, just come down to the castle. The buzz is absolutely electric.
Brilliant.
Just everybody buzzing to get out and just start and just get it done. You've got the runners, you've got the walkers, you've got the Dublin Wicklow Mountain Rescue, you've got everybody there, all the supporters. It's a great thing to be part of. So best of luck to everybody that's taking part in it this year. Hopefully I'll see you at the start. Hopefully I'll also see you at the finish this time. And
you will.
We'll get a hot meal and a pint of Guinness when we finish.
Dead right.
Well, Jane, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. And I don't think this will be the last time we'll be having a talk. I think we can go down a couple of rabbit holes.
Yeah, no, it's been great chatting. Happy to come on anytime. And if you're interested in all my history tidbits, my Instagram is @janecasey.ie, and I'm also on TikTok as well. So
good stuff.
Follow, send me a message.
Definitely do. Jane, thanks again.
Cheers, Owen.
A huge thanks to Jane again for joining me on the show and putting in the research on this really interesting topic. I could have spoken to Jane for another hour about this, or anything about history in general. If you're down at Dublin Castle on the 12th of January, come say hi. I'll either see you there or at the finish line, hopefully this time. That's it for this episode. If you are enjoying this podcast, please show your support by liking, sharing and commenting on whatever platform you're using. We'll be back in the new year with another episode of the Hiker Podcast. So until then, happy trails.